my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt-Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place for women to come together to share their childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from women all over the world. Today's episode is sponsored by Ergobaby. Founded in 2003, Ergobaby has pioneered the gold standard for comfortable, ergonomic, soft-structured carriers. Ergobaby is dedicated to helping families bond, grow, and thrive by creating premium baby products where function and quality are not compromised. Ergobaby has created a broad range of award-winning baby carriers, strollers, swaddlers, nursing pillows, and related products that fit into families' daily lives seamlessly, comfortably, and safely. In 2020, they launched EverLove by Ergobaby, a first-of-its-kind baby carrier buyback and resale program, a sustainability effort to support families and the planet. At the end of this episode, I'll be talking to Brandi all about Ergobaby and EverLove by Ergobaby. I also want to say a big thank you to all of our listener supporters via Patreon. Patreon is a platform to help you support the creators that you love, and for just $5 a month, you can support The Birth Hour and get access to special perks like our private Facebook group, our archived episodes, and bonus content each month. We also now have an annual membership option that comes with a free month. You can find out more at patreon.com/birthhour or thebirthhour.com/support. Today's birth story guest is Christina. She's going to be sharing 3 birth stories. The first was a hospital birth that she found to be really stressful, and so she went on to have a birth center and then home birth. I also just want to add that I had a cold when we recorded this, so my voice is a little bit off, but we got it done, and it was a great episode. Hi, Christina. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Can you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Sure. So I'm Christina, and I'm 31 years old. I'm married to my husband, Chris, and we've been married for 7 years, and we live in Central Illinois. We have a dog, Lucy, and then our 3 kids, Greta, who is 5, Ewan, who is 3, and then Nadia, who was just born in July. She'll be 12 weeks in a couple of days, and that's actually when I go back to work from my maternity leave. And my husband is actually the assistant director at our kids' daycare center, and then I work in investment services.
All right. Let's start back with your first pregnancy and how that went for you.
Sure. So my husband and I got married back in spring of 2013, and we wanted to be married for a year before we started our family. And our anniversary was coming up in May, but we were planning a trip to Orlando with both of our families to go do Disney and Universal Studios. And I really didn't want to be pregnant for that, and that was in the summer. So we decided to hold off and start trying when we got back. And so we started trying immediately because I was very ready. And that first month that we tried, my period was actually due around my 25th birthday. We were up visiting my family just to celebrate and hang out by their pool. And I wasn't drinking, and I was really hoping that nobody would notice because we usually have a couple drinks out by the pool. But luckily that wasn't an issue. But the whole time I knew that it was very possible I could be pregnant, and I really had my hopes up. So Sunday morning when we were getting ready to leave, I started spotting, and I was sure that my period was starting, and I was kind of bummed, but it was the first time, so tried not to be too upset. But then on Monday morning, it still hadn't started, so I kind of started to think maybe I was pregnant. So I decided Tuesday, if nothing happened by then, I'd wake up and take a test. So it hadn't started yet on Tuesday morning. I woke up super early and took the test, came back to bed to sit with my husband and wait. And my heart was just pumping out of my chest. But we waited the 3 minutes, and then I went back in the bathroom and saw 2 dark pink lines, and I was just shaking, and I couldn't believe it that we actually did manage to get pregnant on the first try. It seemed too good to be true, but I was just over the moon.
And then how did your pregnancy go?
It went well. So we had planned, I had always thought I would have a hospital birth. I thought I would have an epidural and all the drugs. But I stumbled upon the business of being born before we actually started trying to have a baby, just like many other people have mentioned on the podcast. And that really opened up my eyes and made me start kind of wanting to have a natural birth, maybe even a home birth. So I decided that I wanted to have a midwife and a doula at the very least. We lived in an apartment at the time, so we kind of decided not to go the home birth route. But we started looking into providers in the area, and I found a doctor's office that had an OB and a certified nurse midwife that could attend births in the hospital. So that's the way we decided to go. And I hired a doula right away because I knew I wanted that extra support with it being our first. And then we did take a natural childbirth course as well, birth boot camp, which I haven't heard mentioned on the podcast before, I don't think, but it's sort of like the Bradley method, but it's a 10-week course. And we met at our instructor's house every Sunday for about 3 hours. And each week was a different topic regarding pregnancy or birth. And it was super hands-on. There was a lot of things that we got to practice, like labor positions and things like that. And we looked forward to having that special time every week to bond with each other and with the baby and just focus on my pregnancy and the upcoming birth. But overall, my pregnancy was great, fairly uneventful. I loved being pregnant. The first trimester, of course, was a little bit rough. I had some nausea and only wanted to eat carbs and a lot of fruit. And I was really tired. I just remember coming home from work and napping just like every day in those early weeks. And I was definitely the most active this pregnancy. After the first trimester, I was going to the gym and doing prenatal yoga and all the things I struggle to find time for now. But it was my first baby, so I could just really focus on myself. So we had, at 20 weeks, we had our anatomy scan. I found out I had a low-lying placenta and that it means that it was just down closer to my cervix, and our baby was also transverse. So we scheduled another ultrasound at 28 weeks to check on those two things, but otherwise everything else went well, and they were able to tell the sex. So we had the tech write down the sex on a piece of paper and waited a week until we could do a reveal party with our families. And we had a cake made at a local bakery that would be pink or blue on the inside. And so we found out that it was a girl. And I'm one of 3 girls. I have 2 sisters, and my husband actually has only a sister as well. And I just always pictured myself having a daughter. So I was really excited to find out that she was a girl. And so I guess fast forwarding to kind of the end of the pregnancy, I guess going into the birth too, but I started to work from home at 40 weeks pregnant. And I planned at that point to work right up until I was in labor. And the closer that I got to 42 weeks, I started to feel a lot of anxiety about induction and just pressure to have the baby soon. And I knew that I would probably go late, but if after 42 weeks, I found out that the OB from the practice would be there and that I wouldn't be able to have my midwife at my birth. So I was doing all the things to induce labor naturally. I was eating spicy food and pineapple, walking, sitting on the birth ball a ton. I tried acupuncture, I think 3 different times, and sex, and just nothing was seeming to even get anything started. I had no signs that labor was coming. So my husband and I just really tried to take advantage of those final days. We had a lot of date nights and a lot of last dinners. Every dinner we thought could be our last before the birth. So we just really savored that time together while it was just the 2 of us. And then at 41 weeks and 3 days, I had a checkup with my midwife just to check in. And she agreed to postpone doing a biophysical profile, which is kind of an appointment that they do post dates when you have an ultrasound to check fluid levels and whatnot. And I just really didn't want to have a 4th ultrasound. I'd already had 3, and I know that there's conflicting research out there about how safe they can be. So I thought, 3 is enough. So we did a non-stress test instead, and she was good with the results from that. And so we just scheduled my next appointment for after I would be 42 weeks to start talking about next steps. And I left that appointment just feeling really relieved and at peace that I was just being given a little bit of extra time to let my body do its thing on its own. And with that, I also made the decision to go ahead and start my maternity leave from work the next day. And so that kind of brings me right to when things started to happen.
All right, let's go ahead and hear the birth story.
Yeah. So that same evening, Wednesday, we went ahead and ordered pizza from our favorite pizza place, and we ended up having our actual last dinner together. And we just put a movie on Netflix, and I was sitting on my birth ball, and I started to feel some mild contractions. It just sort of felt like menstrual cramps. So started to kind of think maybe something was happening, but they started coming regularly. So I decided to download an app and start timing them. And we called it an early night just so that we would be well rested if it was real labor. And then right before bed, I did go ahead and insert a evening primrose oil capsule vaginally. My doula had mentioned that it could help ripen the cervix, and if things were ready to happen, that it would just kind of help move things along. So whatever I could do to encourage labor to keep going. And I woke up in the night to go to the bathroom. And I had started losing my mucus plug and had some bloody show. Contractions were still coming at this point, but it was early, so they were very easy to get through. So I went back to bed and woke up again at 6:30, and I was sure at this point that I was in early labor because contractions hadn't stopped. So I decided to just stay up and start my day. So I told my husband, go ahead and go into work. I don't think anything's going to happen just yet, but I was texting with my doula, and she said, maybe it's a better idea to have him stay. So he called into work and told him that he wouldn't be there and went to go make us breakfast. And I finished packing my hospital bag. And then we ate, and I decided to go just walk some laps around our apartment complex that we were living at the time. And I realize now in hindsight that I should have been resting and saving my energy for later. I was just so excited and so concerned that labor would stall because I knew that was possible, but I really could have probably used some extra sleep or at least resting during this time. So we, through the morning and early afternoon, we snacked a little bit. We took more walks outside. I watched tons of The Office on Netflix and just sat at my birth ball, and it just didn't really seem like things were progressing, and contractions were still coming, but it wasn't really getting harder. And so I was just worried that I was maybe in for a long labor. So I started trying some positions from spinning babies, just trying to get the baby into a better position for birth. And I know once that happens that, you're putting more pressure on your cervix to help with dilation, and that might move more things along. And I was texting with my doula all the while. So she decided to come over and just suggested and helped me get into some different positions to labor in. I was walking up and down the stairs in our stairwell, 2 stairs at a time, and just really trying to open things up. And so I continued to labor with her assistance, a lot of the time sitting backwards on the toilet in our bathroom, which was really comfortable for some reason. I hear a lot of people mention that. And then I was also sitting kind of backwards on a kitchen chair in our living room, just leaning over and letting my husband and doula do hip squeezes and put hot rice packs on my lower back since I was having a lot of back labor. But my contractions would start to get closer together, and then they would space back out. So it was really hard to tell where things were at. It was just hard to gauge if things were getting more serious or what. So finally, around 10 or 11 that night, I started to have a little bit of nausea. And my doula said, okay, maybe it's time to go ahead and head to the hospital. Nausea can be a sign of transition. So I kind of got really excited thinking, okay, this is it. So I never got sick with the nausea. I did ride in the car to the hospital with our bathroom trash can between my knees just in case. But luckily, the hospital was only 15 minutes away. So I had a short, very unpleasant car ride there. And it was late, so we had to go through the ER, and labor and delivery at our hospital is on the complete other side of the hospital. And so a nurse pushed me in a wheelchair all the way up there, and we got into our room, had my vitals taken, and got hooked up to some monitors. And I immediately asked for a birth ball and the birth tub. I knew there was only one, and I wanted it because I was certain that I was going to be having a baby in a matter of hours. And our hospital was allowing at the time for you to labor in the tub. And I just thought that would be really helpful to relax and let things happen. But when the nurse checked my cervix, I was only 3 centimeters dilated and 70% effaced, which was so surprising to me because I had been in labor for so long already. But she said she'd call my midwife. And at this time, my husband went to the car to go get all of our stuff because we, for some reason, thought that we were going to be staying, which was a rookie mistake. But I labored on the monitor for a half an hour, which is what they required to decide whether or not to admit me and how things were going. And the nurse came back and she said she talked to my midwife, and based on everything that she told her, they were suggesting that we go home and just try to get some sleep and come back. We could stay, but that they wouldn't admit me until I was at least 4 centimeters. And I was just totally crushed. I was so exhausted already, and I couldn't even fathom going home. Like, I had no idea what she was even saying. Like, how are we going to go home and then just come back and do this all again? I was just done. So my husband showed up at that moment with all of our bags, and I got to tell him, okay, well, we're going home. So he brought everything back downstairs, and we got back in the car. My doula told me to just call her in the morning, and we rode home. And I don't even think I said a word on the way home. We were both just couldn't believe it. And I was just devastated and just done being in labor. And so we got home and tried to go to bed, but I don't think I slept at all. I was just trying to cope through contractions on my own so that my husband could sleep. I knew I wasn't going to get any sleep, but I at least wanted him to be rested. And somehow he did manage to sleep through all of the noise I was making. I was just doing a lot of moaning through contractions and just trying to get comfortable and moving around. So at 8 a.m., we finally just decided to get out of bed because we weren't getting rest anymore at that point. And I got in the shower and just let the hot water run on my back. And my husband hopped in with me and was doing some counter pressure during contractions. And then my doula texted to say that she was coming back over. So when she got there, we kind of just continued on like we were the day before. I was laboring in different positions around our apartment, and my contractions still weren't getting to the standard 4-1-1 that people talk about. That's kind of when you're supposed to go into the hospital typically when contractions are, I think it's 4 minutes apart, lasting for a minute for an hour. And so mine were just crazy. The length between them was getting sometimes between 6 and 7 minutes apart, but then they were lasting sometimes for 3, maybe even 4 minutes with multiple peaks. So they would just keep going. So I was super exhausted and needed to just rest. So my husband went in our room. It was really bright in there. And so he hung a black blanket over the blinds to make it really dark. And I just laid down and tried to rest while he went to go have something to eat. And I was just really running out of steam at this point. I started having fantasies about just going to the hospital and just getting Pitocin or whatever, getting an epidural, something to just make it stop and get it done. And I didn't actually want this, but it's just in the moment I was feeling so desperate. So I decided to finally call the provider on call and just see what they thought I should do. And there was no answer. So I left a message for a call back. And when the provider on call called back, it was actually a new midwife at the practice. I'd only met her one time, I think during a prenatal, just in case she had to be at my birth, which she was. So I was having a contraction right when she called. And so I handed the phone to my husband and he talked to her. And she told him what I already knew, but I guess just needed to hear that if I wanted a natural birth, I just needed to try to stick it out. And if I went to the hospital, they could push things along. But, she knew that that wasn't what I wanted based on my birth plan. So we hung up with her, and I think my doula decided or mentioned that we try to do the breast pump for nipple stimulation, which can sometimes help induce labor. In my case, at least get things going a little faster. So my husband got it set up, and I was just sitting in my room on my birth ball, hooked up to my pump, just sobbing. I was just a sad mess at this point. I just was so hopeless, like labor was never going to end. And at this point, I was getting close to about 48 hours since my contractions first started. So I was just really losing energy fast. And so at this point, my doula, I think she could just see that I needed some encouragement. And so she suggested that I try to check my purple line. I don't know if you're familiar with the purple line method, but I had never heard of it.
Down like your back to your butt, basically.
Yep,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So it's like, it basically is like a line that runs sort of like up your butt crack, essentially. And it gets darker as you're dilating. And so it's, I guess, almost like if you picture a thermometer, like as it gets higher up the line, that means that you're dilating more, or it should. And so
not everybody gets it, just so in case you're wondering.
Yeah. So I didn't know, I had never heard of it, but I went and I checked and I had one and it was near the top. So I was like, okay, well, that was just like gave me the sort of second wind that I needed to keep going. So after a little while longer, it was around 4 p.m., we decided to head to the hospital for the second time. And at this point, I was not letting them send me home. No matter what they said, I was going to stay. And so we got into a room, we got checked in, and they checked me, and I was 8 centimeters and almost completely effaced. And I just lost it. I was just bawling, just happy tears. I was so relieved to hear that I had made progress, and I was actually pretty close at that point to being done. So I sat and labored on the birth ball for most of the time in the hospital. It was probably a few hours, and I just sat with the monitors on me. And every once in a while, the midwife on call, when she got there, she'd come in and just sort of check on me, but let me do my thing. And I didn't really want to be checked much during labor, but after a while, I'd asked to be checked again because I thought, if I was 8 before, it shouldn't take me that much longer to be complete. So when they checked me, I was 10 centimeters and +1 station, but I had a cervical lip. So the midwife asked that I get up on the bed and lay on my left side for my next contraction to kind of help get that cervical lip out of the way. And I did. And during that contraction, I gave just like the tiniest push, and my bag of waters burst and fluid gushed everywhere. It was like someone just poured like a bucket of water all over me and the bed and the floor. And it was actually kind of shocking. And it's hard to prepare, I guess, for how much fluid there actually is. But things picked up after that. Contractions were coming faster and more intense. And I guess the monitor was showing the baby's heart rate wasn't recovering as well as the midwife wanted it to be. And so they had me change positions again. And I got up and I was sort of standing, leaning over the bed away from the monitor. And so I couldn't see what was happening. Didn't know it at the time, but I guess the midwife was just sort of staring at the monitor very intently. And it was quiet, and it was just really tense in the room because she was just very intent on seeing how the baby was doing after each contraction. So eventually they detached me from the monitor so I could go to the bathroom. And this is when my doula sort of like pulled me aside and explained that the midwife was starting to get concerned, and that she could just feel like where things were heading, and that if I wanted to avoid them intervening, that I just needed to try to get the baby out soon. So I was sitting on the toilet, I was trying to pee, but there was so much pressure, like I couldn't even isolate those muscles to pee. And so my doula suggested just putting my hand down there to see if I could feel the baby's head. And I felt something soft and squishy, and I didn't think that it could be the baby. It just didn't feel like I thought a head should feel. And I thought it was maybe just my own body, and maybe I was just super like swollen or something from labor. But then I realized that it was actually the baby's head, and it was right there. So my doula went and told the nurse, and she informed us that the midwife during that time had left to go home. I guess she went home to go grab a bite to eat or something. I don't know why, because I was complete. But anyway, we didn't know that she was leaving, and I was pretty upset because I was basically at that point very close to pushing. So she must have gotten back pretty quickly, because the next thing that I remember is just telling her that I was ready to push and that I wanted to stand up. We had talked earlier about me kind of squatting on the bed with one of those bars, but I just said, I have to stand up. This is the only way I can even imagine pushing right now. So she seemed a little skeptical about that, but she said that's fine. So I was standing like on the side of the bed facing out, and she was sitting down in a stool in front of me. And I forgot to mention earlier, but she, since she was new, she actually had to still have the OB at the practice supervising and attending all of the births with her. So she told me that they had just called him and he was on his way. And so to just pant through the next few contractions, which is basically impossible when your body is just pushing. Like there was nothing I could do to stop it. It's like trying to hold in like a sneeze or something. The baby was coming whether I wanted it or not. So the OB, I think he showed up about 10 minutes later. So I tried not to push. I'm sure that I still was, but he barely got gloves and a gown on, and I just started giving it everything. But I did not like pushing at all. I know some people mention that it feels good to push and that they like being able to actually do something. And to me, the sensation was just overwhelmingly intense. And in that moment, I had the thought that like up until that point, I was doing okay, I guess. But I thought, I don't know if I ever want to feel this feeling ever again. But luckily, I only pushed for about 8 minutes or so when the OB got there. It wasn't long at all before I had the ring of fire, and I was expecting burning, but I could actually feel myself starting to tear, and it felt like it was going like straight up. It was awful. And so I said out loud, like, I feel like I'm tearing. And the doula was asking for mineral oil, but it was just too late at this point. And so somebody in the room, I think it was probably the midwife, was saying, you just have to keep pushing through it. So I was just still giving it my all. Even between contractions, I was just pushing because I was scared and I knew that I needed to get her out. And I was just afraid of them trying to give me an episiotomy or just do something to get her out faster. But one, I guess, sort of funny thing that I remember right before she was born is that it dawned on me in that moment that I wanted skin to skin. And I had been wearing like a swimsuit top and a strapless cover-up dress for labor. And apparently that meant that I had to rip off everything. So I between contractions, just like ripped off my swimsuit top and pulled my dress down and was like, okay, now I'm ready. I wanted to have that baby on my chest like the second she was born. So apparently that was really important in that moment. But the next thing that I knew, my midwife was telling me to reach down and grab my baby. And I pulled her up to my chest, and I really, leading up to birth, I thought that I would cry, but I didn't at all. I was just, I think, in shock. I just was staring at her, and she was so perfect, and she was just this real baby. I just couldn't believe that my body made her, and she was here, and it was just so surreal finally seeing who had been inside there all that time. So we just kind of sat there for a moment. I was just sort of sitting on the edge of the bed holding her, and I had a really short cord, so I couldn't pull her up all the way. And it seemed we wanted to do delayed cord clamping as well. So it seemed like the midwife was kind of in a rush with that. She was like, okay, is it okay now? Like, can we get the cord cut and get you moved to the bed? And I didn't really understand why, but I found out that I had a pretty severe tear, and I think that they just wanted to get started on those repairs. So my placenta didn't take long to come out. They put that in a container for my doula to take home to my apartment so that I could have it encapsulated. And when they were getting ready to do my repairs, they weighed and measured my daughter. And I think my dates had to be off. My cycles are irregular, so I thought that might be the case. But at 41 weeks and 5 days, she was only 6 pounds, 12 ounces. I was expecting to have this huge baby because she was so late, but she was just a peanut. But anyway, they got ready to do the repairs, and the midwife asked if I was okay with the OB doing that part. Just, I think, because of the severity. I don't know what degree it was, but I know my doula was standing over my shoulder, and she kind of looked, and she's like, oh yeah, it's bad. You don't want to, it's really bad. You wouldn't want to see it. I'm like, oh my God. So, it took about a half an hour for that to get all the way sewn up. I think I had 2 other small ones as well. But since I was laying flat on my back, I couldn't really hold my daughter or nurse like I wanted to right away. So my husband was the one doing skin to skin. And when the repairs were all done, she was already pretty sleepy. So we just kind of sort of made the most of the rest of that golden hour. And everyone just cleared out and left us alone to bond with her.
Wow. That's quite the story.
Yeah, it was a whirlwind, and it was just a marathon for sure.
Yeah. Well, since you want to get in your other 2 stories, do you have anything from postpartum for this one, or do you want to keep going?
Yeah, I'll just kind of touch on postpartum because it does kind of set the stage a little bit for what I wanted in my second birth. Because of that tear, I had a lot of pain recovering. It was very just not what I expected. I kind of expected more of like a perineal tear, and this was just unlike anything that I was ready for. And once I was brave enough to kind of check things out down there around like 2 weeks postpartum, I realized that where my stitches were, like the edges of the tear weren't really healing upright. It just didn't look right. And so I went in to go see the OB and have him take a look. And he agreed that I don't know, maybe some of my stitches started to come out, but he wanted to wait until 6 weeks postpartum to do anything about it. So when I went to that checkup, he actually was ready that day to do like an outpatient procedure and basically had to like repair that tear. And it was like healing all over again. Like it was like starting over from where I just gave birth. And so all in all, it was probably between like 12 and 15 weeks after my daughter was born before I felt fully healed. And that was just, I made it a goal that I never wanted to have anything like that happen again in a future birth. So just kind of was something that I was very mindful of going into having a second baby.
Yeah. I can definitely relate to the long recovery time. It's not fun.
No, not at all. It just kind of took away from some of the joy in those early days.
Yeah. All right. So how much time did you guys wait before deciding to have another baby?
Yeah. So when my daughter was about a year old, we were ready to start trying again. And with everything that we kind of went through in the first birth and with my tear that I had and everything, I felt like a lot of the things that happened in my first birth could have been avoided or would have been a non-issue had I had a home birth with a home birth midwife and someone who is just maybe a little bit more experienced and more relaxed. And so I had been researching like home birth midwives in the area, and I set up a consultation with one who was highly recommended by people in some of my like Facebook groups, local Facebook groups. And so we ended up meeting her in her home and where she did all her prenatals, and we just clicked with her right away. She was super sweet. She had just this warm and calm presence and all the qualities that I was looking for in a provider. I mean, my first birth wasn't traumatic per se, but I just really was being a lot more picky this time and kind of setting myself up for a more positive, redemptive birth experience. So before I was even pregnant, I had picked my midwife and we basically told her, okay, like stand by, I'll be in contact when I get a positive test. So yeah, it took us about 3 months to try this time before I got pregnant. And I had learned that the dollar store tests were not only cheap, but very sensitive to detecting the pregnancy hormones. So I had bought like a whole bunch and had just like a stockpile so that I wouldn't feel guilty for taking a bunch if I tested too early or if I wanted to do one every day, which I think I did for like a week. But I did get a faint positive at 10 days after ovulation. And my husband and I found out again together, just like we did with our first. So we were really excited to go on this journey again and hopefully have a better outcome.
Yeah. So it sounds like you were like good to go already with your care provider. How did your pregnancy go?
Yeah, so the pregnancy was pretty smooth overall. There were just a couple of things that I'll mention, a few bumps along the way. The first one was that right after I found out I was pregnant, we had a brand new birth center open up locally. It's one of, I think, 3 in the state of Illinois. So it's a really big deal to have that here. And it's a really awesome option. For me, I wanted a home birth, so I was like, oh, that's nice. But my midwife, Amy, actually stepped away from her home birth practice and became the director of midwifery at the birth center here. So right off the bat, I was kind of faced with the decision of home birth or like giving up the home birth or giving up Amy, who I loved. So I was really upset at first, but the choice was pretty clear that I wanted to stay with her, and the birth center was gorgeous and amazing. And it seemed like a fine alternative to having the home birth that I wanted. So we decided to stick with her and do the birth center. And after my 20-week scan, we did another like sex reveal with this baby, found out we were having a boy. And so that took a little bit of time to process because I was pretty sure it was another girl, but we were excited to have one of each. And like I kind of said too, going into this birth, I was really wanting to just avoid having like such damage done to my own body after birth. So Amy was really great and working with me and talking about things we could do during labor and during birth to kind of keep that from happening again. And my husband also helped me with perineal massage, which was a little bit weird and awkward. To be honest, I'm not sure if it helped, but I was willing to try anything. So the only other thing I'll mention from that pregnancy is that about a month before my due date, my company that I worked for at the time was making cuts, and I actually was laid off from my job when I was 36 weeks. So I was just getting ready to start this 12-week maternity leave, and I ended up having 8 months off before I found another job. So that was just a really big shock. I had a lot to process with that. And once I kind of got through realizing just, it just kind of changed everything and looking forward into the future. But I was grateful for that. I had some extra time to bond with my 2-year-old before she was no longer an only child. And I just sort of tried to step into the new stay-at-home mom role temporarily. So it was a bit of an adjustment.
Yeah. Okay. So then how did labor start for you this time?
Yeah. So with this labor, it was again, anything but textbook. All 3 of my labors have just been like weird, and I had no idea what to expect. So it started actually 3 days before he was born. I was 40 weeks and 1 day. So just after my due date, things started to kind of happen. It was a Saturday night during dinner, started having some mild contractions, and it was June. So we were supposed to be having like a big summer storm. And I thought maybe the barometric pressure changes would be enough to send me into labor. So things were sort of happening. So I took a bath, had a glass of wine, and just tried to relax, and contractions weren't going away. I had to go to the bathroom several times, and I had started losing bits of my mucus plug and having some bloody show, and things were just sort of moving. So contractions continued through the night. I was texting Amy, my midwife, and then also my doula and my birth photographer and my mom, all the people that were coming to us just to keep them in the loop. And my mom and my sister were planning to come help with my daughter, and they live 2 hours away. So they got on the road around 5 a.m. And unfortunately, by 6 o'clock that morning, labor had come almost to a complete halt. So that Sunday was Father's Day, and we had made plans with my in-laws to come over for a cookout, and we had no idea what was going on with me. So we just said, yeah, just still go ahead and come on over. And all throughout that day, my contractions never went away all the way, but they were like 15 to 20 minutes apart. So it wasn't really prodromal labor. It just was like super slow, stretched out labor. And they were like, they still hurt when they came. I had to kind of, every once in a while, I would just kind of stop and lean over my counter in my kitchen or whatever and sway and breathe through the contraction. And then I would just go back to whatever I was doing for the next 20 minutes until I had another one. So it was just really strange. But my midwife suggested that I maybe come into the birth center the next day, meet with her, and that she would check me and just see if I was progressing, if I had any dilation at all. So my mom and my sister stayed another night just to see if things picked back up on Sunday night. But Monday afternoon, it was still kind of the same. So I went to the birth center to see her, and she said I was a tight 3 centimeters and 60% effaced. So something was happening, but it wasn't really moving yet. So she said when true labor started, I would already have a pretty good head start. But I just talked with her, and she kind of eased my mind and just helped me relax. And I just kind of made the decision to let go and just let things play out how they were going to. So we went home, and I sort of just hung out on my birth ball and was watching Netflix and just hanging out. And my mom and sister decided to go ahead and head home because it didn't seem like it was time yet. And so we just joked that, labor is probably going to pick up as soon as they got home, and they would have to turn around and come right back. And of course, that's exactly what happened because at 3 a.m. on Tuesday morning, my contractions picked up again. And I realized at this time that they were now less than 10 minutes apart, and they were definitely getting more intense. So I tried to cope for a while on my own, but about a half hour later at 3:30, they were getting pretty intense, and I needed that counter pressure on my lower back. That's something that always works really well for me during labor. So I woke my husband up and told him I needed this help, and I would when a contraction came, I just get up on my hands and knees on the bed and then sway, and he would do the hip squeezes, and we did that for a while, and then I would just rest in bed in between them and try to get some more sleep in. But my husband ended up filling up the tub for me, and I tried to get in labor in there, but I was just really uncomfortable. So I only lasted about 10 minutes, and I texted my doula and just, asked her to start heading our way. So she did. And my husband brought a kitchen chair up from our kitchen to our bedroom and my birth ball. And that was just sort of my labor zone. So I was just alternating between sitting backwards on the chair and then have a contraction leaning over the birth ball, rocking back and forth, and just sort of doing like a labor circuit. So my doula was at our house by 6:30 in the morning. She stayed with me to support me through labor so that my husband could go attend to our daughter who was waking up, and so he could give her breakfast and everything. And he had taken over texting all of the updates to our birth team so that I could just focus on labor and not having to make sure that people were there when they needed to be. So I was just walking the halls of our house upstairs where our room was. And whenever I had a contraction, I would just stop wherever I was and just sway and vocalize through it and then keep walking. And a few hours went by. And during one particularly intense contraction, I just felt something pop deep inside of me. It was a really weird feeling. And at first I thought that maybe it was like the baby's head engaging in my pelvis, or maybe he had changed positions or something. But then I kind of thought it could be my water. So I went to the bathroom and I was sitting backwards on the toilet for my next contraction. My husband and my doula sort of followed me in there to see what was happening. And during my next contraction, I just had this trickle of liquid start coming out. And as I was contracting, I just was like yelling out, "I'm not peeing." Like, that's not pee, that's my water. And I think they were amused. But so my water had broken, and that really kicked things into high gear. So my contractions were starting to come every couple of minutes at this point. I didn't really feel like I had much of a break at all in between to recover. And so we decided that it was time to head to the birth center. So we did. My husband got the car loaded up, and we said goodbye to our daughter, and both of our moms were there and my sister. So we left, and it was about 10 minutes away from our house. So we got there at about 10:45 in the morning. And I couldn't even make it through the parking lot, like walking from the car into the birth center without having another contraction. So they were really coming quick. And when we got to the door, Amy, our midwife, was waiting for us, and our birth photographer was already there in the birthing suite. And once we walked into the room, this like feeling just came over me, and I just started crying. And I was just so relieved that we were there. And it wasn't until that moment that it really felt real, like that I was going to have a baby. So Amy checked my blood pressure and the baby's heartbeat, and then they got the tub filled up, and I could not get stripped down fast enough and get into the tub. It felt so good, and I didn't think that they would ever be able to get me out. But my husband and doula sort of sat on either side of the birth tub, just applying counter pressure to my back and giving me sips of water. And I just really tried to settle in and get in my labor zone. And I was starting to get a little bit hot in the tub, which I guess I wasn't expecting. I just thought I would want to stay in there forever, but I was getting overheated, and my legs were starting to cramp up from squatting. So I decided that I needed to get out and just go labor on the bed for a little bit. And so when I was having contractions on the bed, I just remember having that classic, I can't do this anymore thought. Like it was getting really, really hard, and I wasn't coping well, or I didn't feel like I was coping well anymore. And I wasn't saying anything out loud. Like after the birth, everyone told me how calm I was and how I was just so like zen. And in my head, I was going insane. And I was just wanting to just yell out, like, how much longer? Like, I just needed to know how much longer. And as if anyone could tell me the answer to that question, but I just needed something to grab onto to keep going. And it took a while to realize that was probably when I was in transition. So soon I could feel my body start to push a little bit during contractions. And so Amy said to just go with it. She didn't ever check me when I was in labor, but I think she could just tell that I was ready. So She suggested I try to get back into the tub because we had talked extensively about how badly I wanted to try a water birth and how I wanted that water to help soften my tissues to keep me from tearing again. So she managed to help me get into the tub, and I was pushing there, and every so often I would sort of reach up with my hand inside and I could feel my son's head coming down. And it was just the coolest feeling to be able to feel him right there and just knowing how close we were and have that proof that we were almost to the finish line. So at this point, my doula went out to like the living area, I guess, of the birth center where our moms and my sister and our daughter were. And she brought my daughter back into the room because we had wanted her to be present for the actual birth. And I was so out of it. I didn't even know that she was there. She just kind of, for a 2-year-old, she did really, really well with being in that situation. She just sort of got a feel for the atmosphere. But I remember in our birth film, there's a clip of her just waving at me like, "Hi, Mom, hi." And I just was totally out of it. I didn't even really know that she was in the room with us. But once I was in the tub again, I just started getting really hot and crampy again. And so I just had to get out. The water birth wasn't happening. So they helped me out of the tub onto the bed, and I was laying on my side. My midwife was holding up my one leg while my husband was behind me doing counter pressure on my back. And I was just using all of my energy to just push as slowly as I could, especially once I got to the ring of fire and when he was crowning. I just really wanted to let things stretch and not go too fast because I had paid for that immensely the first time. And later, my birth team was commenting on how it was some of the most controlled pushing that they had ever seen. So I think I pushed about a half an hour total, so a little bit longer than with my first, but I finally felt my son's head come out, and on the next push, the rest of his body sort of slowly slid out, and he was born. And I reached down and I brought him up to my chest and again just burst into tears because it's that sweet relief knowing that it was over and I could finally relax. And my midwife, actually, something sort of cool, she asked me if I wanted to feel the cord while it was still pulsating, which I would never think to do. And I was so glad that she suggested it. So of course I said yes. And it was just mind blowing. It was so cool getting to feel like the blood still pulsing to the baby and just seeing something that my body created to keep my baby sustained all those months, and that it was doing its job, getting all his blood back into him. It was just really neat. But it took about 45 minutes for my placenta to finally come out. And my midwife had gotten a little bit nervous, I think, during that time, because I think they usually want it out within an hour. And we were getting close to that point. But she gave me some herbs, and I sat on the birth stool, and eventually it did come out. And she examined me with her midwife, her like headlight lamp thing. It reminds me of like what coal miners wear. But she checked me for tears, and I didn't have any, and I was thrilled. I was very proud of myself for managing to get through birth without any tears. So anyway, we had the first latch with my son. He was a breastfeeding champ from the beginning, and she checked him over and weighed him, and he was 8 pounds, 7 ounces, which was like 1.5 pounds bigger than my first. And he was several days earlier than her. So he was just a big boy. But anyway, everything, we got kind of cleaned up. We had an amazing deli sub that I had requested for my first meal since I was craving lunch meat all during pregnancy. And then our moms and my sister took our daughter home. And my husband and I took a nap in the bed in the room with our son. And it was probably about 7 hours after he was born that we were already headed back home.
And I'm guessing your recovery was a lot better this time around.
Yeah, so much better. I did have really bad hemorrhoids this time. I think because I spent so much time squatting during labor, and I spent a lot of time on the toilet during labor, just putting a lot of pressure down there. Yeah. So it took a good 2 weeks for those to heal, and nothing that I did helped. I tried everything. I even had a prescription from my midwife for the pain, and I couldn't sit for 2 weeks. So luckily my son was really good at nursing in the side lying position from the get-go. So I spent about 2 weeks laying in bed on my side, just letting him nurse. And that's other than that, physical recovery was good. And then the only other thing I'll mention from this postpartum is that I did struggle with anxiety, like postpartum anxiety, and I have it already normally, but it was a lot worse after he was born. I didn't really deal with that the first time, but my anxiety sort of manifests as rage, and I just get like every little thing will push me over the edge, and I'm pretty calm normally. So logically, I know that I'm overreacting in a situation, but I just felt really out of control. So at my 6-week checkup, I discussed it extensively with my midwife, and we decided that the best course of action was to get on medication. And I am so, so glad that I did that. I could tell a difference like the next day, 2 days later, and just how I was able to deal with life in general. But I stopped feeling like a different person. I stopped snapping at my husband for every little thing. I had more patience with my toddler. And I decided that, after my next pregnancy and birth, that I would immediately get on some sort of medication, which is what I did this time because I just didn't want to wait for things to get bad before I nipped it in the bud.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that aspect too.
Yeah.
All right, let's hear about baby number 3.
Yeah. So we waited a little bit longer this time before we got pregnant. Our 2-year-old son was such a handful, but we wanted to keep the age gap between our kids pretty small. So we didn't want to keep waiting, and we just decided to go for it. So it did take us about 4 months to get pregnant this time. And we were pretty decided that it was going to be our last baby. So I had decided that I wanted to surprise him when we did get pregnant. So I was really sneaky about testing, which I hadn't been before, but I never let him know. Like when I was taking tests, I didn't even talk about it. I had the tests hidden in our bathroom cabinet. And after I would take them, I would like cover up the evidence in the trash. I just wanted to completely catch him off guard. So I ended up getting a positive test early, again, with a dollar store test on a Wednesday morning. And we had a date night planned already for that Friday night. So I decided that's when I was going to surprise him. So I put the test in a little box and I wrote a note and put baby number 3 coming July 2020. And it was really hard to keep it from him for those couple days. But when we went out for our date, before we went into the restaurant, I gave him the box in the parking lot in the car. And it was so worth it because he had no idea. I mean, we were obviously trying, so he knew that. But it was really fun to get to surprise him because it was probably my last chance to get to do that. But this pregnancy started out really similar to the other two. As far as the first trimester, I had some nausea, some fatigue. I never got sick. I just didn't have much of an appetite. When I was 11 weeks, I did get the flu for the very first time in my life. Of course, had to be when I was pregnant. And it happened right after Christmas. And I actually spent New Year's Eve. That was the day I think I found out I had the flu. I spent it by myself in bed, miserable. And it took weeks for me to fully recover. I think probably just being pregnant didn't help because my immune system wasn't as great and a lot of energy was going toward the pregnancy. So both my kids also caught it, and it was just a really hard few weeks. It took about a month before we were all healthy. But once we got through that, things were going really well. I had planned to have this baby at the birth center again with Amy. But about halfway through my pregnancy, I actually got an email from the birth center announcing that Amy was leaving. And I was like, wait, what? So I reached out to her right away and I found out that she was actually leaving to go back to doing home births. And there was no doubt in my mind that I had to keep Amy as my provider. But she told me that her contract with the birth center made it so that she couldn't keep any of her clients if she left. So we talked a lot and we kind of came up with the idea that since I had originally followed her there in the first place, that maybe they would make an exception for me to continue care with her. So I ended up writing a 2-page letter to the administrator at the birth center, just really explaining my case and why I felt so strongly about staying with Amy and asking to transfer care to her as a home birth midwife. And it took some back and forth, and I don't think that they wanted to let me transfer, but they did finally agree. So I was actually finally going to have my home birth that I had wanted after all. So my last appointment at the birth center was actually my 20-week appointment with my anatomy scan. And since we already have a girl and a boy, we decided to keep this baby sex a surprise. And it was going to be a surprise for Amy too. So we all found it out together at the birth. But Anyway, Amy started coming to my house for prenatals. And I was able to schedule them in the evenings and after work. And it was just so flexible and casual. And I loved everything about having my appointments at home. But right around this time, it was early March. And that's kind of when everything started to get more serious with COVID. Up until that point, like my husband and I had even still had our baby moon anniversary trip planned for May. And we were still thinking we were going to be doing that. But in early mid-March, things kind of started to shift. And I started to work from home. And then the next week, the daycare that our kids attend, where my husband works, actually closed. And so he was furloughed for a couple of months. And so we were all home together 24/7. So that was really interesting. And of course, it was just strange going through pregnancy and a pandemic, just being home and not seeing people and never really leaving the house. One thing that did happen during that time to note is that when I was around 26 weeks, it was Easter weekend, and my husband started to feel kind of sick. And the day before Easter, he was told that he should, based on his symptoms, self-isolate from us. They said for 14 days, but we actually ended up having him isolate for 7 days. So I was pregnant and working full time and still trying to take care of everyone by myself while being very scared of catching COVID, if that's what it was, or the kids getting sick. And it was just a really stressful time. So we got through it though. And the only other thing I would mention from this pregnancy that I didn't deal with previously is I had the Symphysis pubis dysfunction, I believe it's called, when you have just pain around like the pubic bone and in your pelvis. And I had a lot of pain during this pregnancy. From about the end of the second trimester on, I was always in pain. I was sitting still for work for like 8 hours a day. So that was really tough, but I was even in pain when I was laying down. Like I could not find a way to get comfortable. I tried chiropractic. I was doing yoga and stretching, and I had 2 different types of support belts that I tried. Finally, I was trying some arnica tablets, and those would take the edge off a little bit, but ultimately I never got rid of it until after the baby was born. And it actually took a couple of days to go away. It wasn't just instant, like once the baby was out, it was gone. It was probably 2 or 3 days after that it finally subsided. But that would bring me to the birth, I guess.
All right, let's hear it.
Yeah. So my due date with this baby happened to be my last day of work, which was a Friday. And by that point, I was just done being pregnant. Like I mentioned, being in so much pain, I was just so uncomfortable, and I just was not functioning very well at all. So I wasn't patient enough to wait for labor to start on its own. So I pretty much immediately started trying to self-induce. And I was a little salty because it was my third baby, and I was going post dates yet again. And people had been telling me for weeks, oh, I think this one might be early because of just all the pressure I was having and things, but I was late once again. So when I was 40 weeks and 3 days, it was a Monday, I made an acupressure appointment with a massage therapist recommended by our birth photographer. And she had like a 90-some% success rate putting moms into labor with this labor induction acupressure that she did. So I made an appointment with her. And when I went in, the first part of what she does is she gives a castor oil orange juice drink. And I never planned to, the castor oil was probably the last thing that I would try for inducing labor, but I was there and I just decided to go for it. So it actually wasn't that bad. I sort of sipped it during the acupressure appointment with her. She did pressure points on my wrist and my ankles, and then told me that if it was going to work, that labor would start probably within 24 to 48 hours. So I went home and just sort of settled in, but nothing really happened other than like a couple of more loose bowel movements. But for the most part, I just felt the same. So my midwife ended up coming over on Wednesday, and she tried to do a sweep. I think she came over on Monday as well and tried, but was unsuccessful. So this time she came and tried again, and it was only, my cervix was like a fingertip open, and it was still really far back. She could hardly even reach it. So she did a little bit of massage to just sort of help soften it. But after that, we went to my kitchen and we made Midwife's Brew, which is almond butter, lemon verbena tea, apricot juice, and castor oil. And you just put it all in the blender and drink it like a smoothie, or in my case, I drank it over ice. And funny story about that, my husband actually the day before went driving all over town for like a wild goose chase to find this apricot juice. Like no grocery stores carried it in the area. And finally, when we were doing some research online, it sounded like, I think the brand that we were looking for is like a Mexican brand. And so there's a Mexican grocery store on the other end of town. He drove all the way over there and they didn't have it, but he asked at the front counter. And the lady said, "Oh, I think we have like one can in the back." And she went, and it was the very last can of the apricot flavor of this juice. And so he kind of put in a lot of effort to make sure that I could do this Midwife's Brew. But anyway, so after that, my midwife left and my husband came home a little bit early from work to just stay with our older two kids and give them dinner so that I could really focusing on just resting as much as possible. So I was just laying in bed trying to get comfortable for a few hours. I was binging on The Office once again. And around 3 p.m., I started to time contractions because it seemed like they were coming regularly enough that I should be keeping track. So over the next few hours, they got stronger and I realized I had to actively relax during them. So a few more hours went by and it was about 6:45. I was having a contraction and I felt a pop inside like I did with my second baby. So I didn't move. I just laid there and I called my husband upstairs and I told him, "I think my water broke, but I'm not sure. And I just want you to be here in case I get up and it starts to like gush everywhere." So I slowly got up and made my way into our bathroom and I had to pee. But then when I was done, I noticed that there was still fluid coming out. And when I looked, I could see that I had bloody show. I was like, okay, yeah, it's definitely my water. So my husband called my midwife, Amy, and then I called my mom because, again, she had a 2-hour drive to get to us and she was supposed to be helping out with our older kids when I was in labor. So contractions picked up speed really quickly. They were about 2 minutes apart. So I didn't have much break in between them. And so I texted Amy again and I just said, "Hey, like, I know you're getting ready to come, but like things are picking up. So you come as soon as you can." So she said she'd be there soon. And I also called our birth photographer and I started to kind of worry at this point that people would even get here in time. Like it seemed like things were really happening quickly. So I changed and I wanted to have like my hair look halfway decent in our birth photos. So I braided my hair and just sort of got myself looking decent. And my husband was rushing around. He double made our bed with a waterproof liner and like a junky sheet that we didn't care what happened to it. And he put the liner in the birth pool and set up our essential oil diffuser. We turned on my birth playlist and sort of dimmed the lights. And the room was incredibly peaceful. It was just everything that I had pictured when I was idealizing my home birth for all those months. So Amy arrived at 7:45-ish and she started getting her stuff all brought inside and set up. And then she was followed shortly after by the birth assistant, Jessica, and then our birth photographer, Brittany, who was also kind of acting as labor support for me. And my mother-in-law and my mom came too. I think my mom got there later in the evening and my mother-in-law, I'm not sure when she came, but they were also here at the house with us. So I was laboring a lot on my birth ball and also just standing and swaying, like sort of leaning over my bed or my dresser. And I thought I was, handling things pretty well. I had someone putting counter pressure on my back during contractions, but I was really nauseous during this labor, which I had a little bit like briefly in my first labor, but I had never really dealt with that before. I know it can happen. I know there's some people that like throw up their whole labor, but for me, I just was not expecting that at all. So I actually threw up 3 times during labor and I did try to eat like a whole bunch of crackers at one point. I was so hungry and then I promptly threw them all back up. So just that wasn't happening. But I had someone holding up my bottle of peppermint essential oil just under my nose for like a lot of my labor, just kind of helping keep that nausea at bay. But it wasn't very long before I decided to go ahead and get in the pool. And I felt like I was coping pretty well in there, but I think I got a little bit too relaxed and things started to slow down. So Amy asked me to get out, try to go to the bathroom, and then she was going to check me if that was okay with me. And it was. I just wanted to kind of know where I was at. So she did, and I was only 4 centimeters, which I couldn't believe. But she did a sweep and she didn't feel my water bag at all anymore. She said she could feel that our baby had hair, which was crazy since our other 2 were basically bald. So that was kind of exciting, but she kept her hand up inside and was doing sort of a stretch, I guess, of my cervix while I had my next contraction. And that was intense. That was something. I am pretty sure I looked like I was like possessed or something, like writhing around on the bed doing that. But after that, I had a bunch more bloody show, and she said that she thought that she helped stretch me a little bit more. So I went back in the bathroom and I sat on the toilet for a couple of contractions. And then she had suggested getting in the shower for some, hot water relief, but doing abdominal lift and tucks, which I think is actually a spinning baby's position. But it's when you sort of stand leaning like into your partner or somebody or up against a wall, in my case, in the shower, and you sort of lift up your whole belly. And after the contraction's over, when you let go, I think it's just supposed to help the baby get to a more optimal position. And so their head is putting more pressure on the cervix to help dilation. So I don't know how many of those, maybe 5 of those in the shower. And then I got out and my husband's like, okay, well, Amy was suggesting, doing some lunges. Maybe do you want to try that? There was just no way. I was so tired. I said, I just need to go lay down for a little bit and just rest. So my husband came and lay down with me in our bed, and he for sure dozed off. He says that I did too. I don't really remember falling asleep, but he said he could tell that I was sleeping in between contractions. And the birth assistant and the birth photographer were resting during this time as well. So everyone kind of got a breather. And the room was just very dark, and the only sound that you could hear was my labor playlist playing all the songs that I had carefully chosen to kind of keep myself calm and centered. And I was very much in the zone. And contractions got a lot more intense, but they weren't getting really closer together. So when they came, I didn't really have any time to kind of ease into them. It was just like, bam, right at the beginning. It was just super intense. And I think the sounds that I started making sort of changed to reflect that as well. So Amy, my midwife, she was downstairs heating up a rice pack and talking with my mom, and my birth photographer and labor support person, Brittany, was there with me. And I had a really big contraction. And as it was happening, I actually felt the baby descend. Like I felt just a big movement down into the birth canal. And all of a sudden I had the urge to push, and I said out loud, like, I think I have to push. And then I was just doing it instantly. And so my birth photographer went to go get Amy and told her that I was getting ready to push. And the birth pool earlier, when I had gotten in, something was wrong. I don't remember what the issue was, but it wasn't very warm. Like I think we ran out of hot water or something. And so they had started to empty some of it out with the plan to refill it with more hot water. And they were in the process of doing that. And so I just think everyone thought that we had more time before we needed it to be ready, but I was pushing. So Amy asked if I could get over to the pool, and I told her I didn't think I could even move. I just had so much pressure that I just felt like frozen to the bed. And things happened really fast at this point. And I know this because Amy sent me all of my labor notes, knowing that I was going to be sharing my birth story, and she made sure that they were very detailed. So at 12:34 a.m., I had a short break between my contractions, and I decided to make a run for it, or hobble over to the pool, I guess. And I was able to get in, and I got down on my knees, and they were still dumping like pots of hot water into the birth pool, trying to warm it up at this point. But at 12:38, so 4 minutes after I got in to the pool, the baby was crowning, and I had her whole head in my hand, like the whole top of her head. And I just sat there like that for, I think, the next 4 minutes or so as I waited for the next contraction. And it was just super intense burning. Just my body was just stretched around her head, and I was just waiting for the next contraction to come. And Amy reached down to feel what I was feeling, and she reminded me that I needed to support my perineum. And finally, at 12:42, I had my next contraction, and my body just pushed on its own. And I announced that her head was out. And then it was just seconds later that the rest of her body came out and was just floating under the water. It was crazy. And my mom had just barely made it into the room, and I could just hear her like on the side of me, just hear her reaction to seeing me give birth to her grandchild. And it was just really special. And I was so glad that she was there. In the birth video, you can hear me saying like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, as I just realized that I actually had a baby and she was just floating under the water. I had the birth pool lined with twinkle lights. And so as dark as my room was, inside the pool was completely lit. And so you could just see her, and you could see that she had this head full of dark hair. And I looked up at my husband. I was just like, oh my gosh, look at all the hair. And so Amy untangled the cord from around her shoulder and told me to just hang on while she did that, and then said, okay, you can pick her up. And I just pulled her up and was just crying and just so happy. And at this point, we still didn't know if she was a boy or a girl. So we just kind of soaked her in for a moment, but then decided to go ahead and check. And my husband looked and announced that she was a girl. And the whole room just erupted with like laughter and just happy cries from both of our moms that were in there and the birth team. And everyone was just so happy. And my husband had to cut the cord, and I handed our daughter to him so that I could go ahead and get out and deliver the placenta on our bed. And both of our kids had been sleeping for a few hours at this point, but he went and brought each of them in one at a time to meet their new baby sister, and they were basically like rag dolls. They were just asleep. They had no idea what was going on. They did not remember it at all in the morning. Anywho, our birth photographer and birth assistant and our mom sort of worked to drain and deflate the pool and started the laundry. And my husband and I were just snuggled up in bed with our baby. And Amy did the newborn exam. She weighed 7 pounds, 4 ounces. So she was right between the other two. But we were just all cuddled up for the night. We were finally settled in bed around 4 a.m. and everyone left, and we just tried to go to sleep. And yeah.
And then how was your postpartum this time? Still kind of in it.
Yeah, exactly. So postpartum, I took it really easy after this birth. I decided, especially with it being my last, I was just really going to take care of myself and just really savor and honor that time. And so I stayed in bed as much as possible. I didn't even go downstairs at all for the first several days. And my mom stayed with us after the birth. So she was here. She was helping bring me food and making sure that my water cup was full and just getting me whatever I needed. So my bleeding was also only heavy for about like a week or so. I just felt like it was shorter than the other two. So it was definitely by far my easiest physical recovery. But what made this postpartum a little bit different actually centers around some complications that we had with our breastfeeding journey. So that was a very big challenge. So to kind of back up just a tiny bit, with breastfeeding my other two, I breastfed both of them until they were like 2 years old, and it came really easy to me. Like we had barely any issues. I never had thrush or mastitis or any of those complications that come along with breastfeeding sometimes. And I guess I kind of took for granted how easy it was for me, and I never really realized how hard it could be. But both of my kids had tongue and lip ties. And so my daughter, we had a bit of a rough time with her, which is why we got hers revised at 11 weeks. And then with my son, he was good at nursing, but we still had his done for other reasons when he was like a week and a half old. And both of them nursed right away after the procedure with no issue at all. They handled the recovery extremely well. You would never even know that they had it done. Like they weren't fussy or anything like that afterwards. But with this baby, we started out a little bit rough with breastfeeding. during the newborn exam, Amy did notice that she had a tongue and a lip tie. We weren't sure how bad yet, and we weren't sure how nursing was going to go, but she had a very, very shallow latch and a very strong suck. And so she would sort of latch on her own, but like didn't have my full nipple in her mouth, and my nipples were just cracked and bleeding. And I also didn't think she was getting much milk. She was just falling asleep a lot at the breast. Even though she was there all the time, I just didn't really know how much she was getting. So we made the appointment with the same pediatric dentist who did the revisions for my first two when she was just 5 days old. We figured, the sooner that we got her in, the better, and it would just help everything so much, just getting that done as soon as we could. And we had done it before twice. So for us, it was no big deal at all. We knew the drill. We'd been through it all before. So that morning of the procedure, we had her 1 week checkup with the pediatrician, and then we went straight to the revision appointment. And I just nursed her like super quick in the car between appointments, figuring that I'd get her a better feeding when the procedure was done. So unfortunately, they don't allow parents in the room during the procedure. He uses like a laser to do the revision, but they brought her to me afterwards and to nurse, and I tried to get her to latch on, and she like couldn't latch. She just was trying for a little bit, and then she just fell asleep. So I tried not to worry. We were headed straight home afterwards, and I figured that I would just spend some time getting her to nurse when we got home, and it would not be a big deal at all. So we got home, and I still couldn't get her to latch. And I was working with her, and she was just screaming, and then she would fall asleep, and it was just awful. And I was getting really panicky because it had been hours at this point since she ate last. And with a baby that little, I was just really nervous about getting some calories into her. And so hours were going by. My husband was helping me. I was pumping with my hand pump, and we were trying to feed her with a cup and with a spoon, and just nothing was working. She just was spitting it all back out. So we finally had success doing like a finger feeding with a medicine syringe. And we were on the phone with an IBCLC, and she was kind of talking us through just make sure you're getting some milk into her. And so we did that through the night. And for days after that, all that she did was sleep. It was like we had a different baby completely. She was only awake probably for a couple of hours, if that, a day. And she was not waking at all on her own to eat. She didn't even really cry when we did the revision stretches with her lip and her tongue. She would like kind of whimper a little bit, and then she would instantly fall back asleep. Like she had no energy and no will to be awake. So I was pumping, and we were essentially force feeding her around the clock every 2 hours. We had a very tight schedule. And it took two of us to feed her. So one of us would be holding her with our finger in her mouth, and then the other one would be filling the syringe or the finger tube that we use, which is kind of like an SNS. And we would have to refill that. Like it only holds, I think, 12 milliliters. So we were having to refill it like a ton to get through a full feeding. And her suck was very weak. Like she had lost the ability to suck, probably because of the pain under her tongue. So milk would just be pouring out of her mouth when we were trying to feed her. And I have no idea how much milk she was even getting. But feedings were taking about an hour sometimes. And then we'd have like maybe a half hour before we had to do it again. And it was totally exhausting. Meanwhile, I was trying to do as much skin to skin as possible with her between feedings. And I was getting in the bath with her to try to get her to, be soothed enough to latch, and just nothing was working at all. And it was really hard to do all of that and tend to our older two kids. So they actually went to go stay at my parents' house for a whole week, just so that we could focus on getting the baby fed and resting ourselves. So after 5 days of that 24-hour round-the-clock syringe and tube feeding, we had a video call with a different IBCLC, and she had us switch to bottles. And that was huge because my husband was getting ready to go back to work. He only had 2 weeks off. and I needed to be able to feed her by myself. And I had tried doing a few of the syringe feedings by myself, and I needed a third hand. It was impossible. So I was doing some form of triple feeding is what it's called. But usually in triple feeding, you do, I think, breastfeed, and then you pump, and then you do a bottle to top the baby off. And I think it's usually when you have a lower supply. But for me, I was trying to get her used to the breast, and I wanted to still make sure she was getting a bottle. So I would do the bottle first so that she wouldn't run out of energy trying to latch. And then I would try to put her on the breast, and then I would pump everything that was left. So it was a lot of work. And we had a lot of support during this time. We had expertise from my midwife, the pediatrician, the two lactation consultants that we worked with. Our chiropractor was seeing her, and we took her to have craniosacral therapy done twice. And everyone was just stumped. Nobody had any idea why it was taking her so long to recover. 48 hours is normally what they tell you to expect after the procedure's done. So we don't truly know that it was even related to that, but if not, it was just a crazy coincidence. But we just kept doing what we were doing, and she was gaining weight. So they were, everyone was telling us she's safe, she's gaining weight, she's not jaundiced, she seems healthy. But I knew deep down in my gut that she would have been failure to thrive otherwise. Like, she was a baby that just had no will to eat, to keep herself going. And we were just really terrified that something else was wrong. So my mental health was really suffering. I was in a really dark place during this time. I was pretty deep in depression, and I was full of guilt and regret. I just had these thoughts that I did this to her. I made the choice to have the procedures done. I damaged my baby. I damaged our breastfeeding relationship. This is my last chance and at breastfeeding a baby. And it's so important to me. I just couldn't imagine giving it up for good. And I just kept wishing for the impossible, to go back and just not do it at all or do something differently, and mourning that last time that we had a nursing session together when I was rushing to just get it over with so that we could go to her appointment. And if anyone would ask me how I was handling things and how I was doing, I was just totally falling apart. I was just spiraling into a really dark place. So, the day that things finally turned a corner for us, we actually were on our way home from our in-person visit with the lactation consultant we were seeing. She had called our pediatrician to update him since they had a relationship, and his nurse called us 5 minutes after we left the lactation consultant visit and asked us to take her to the ER for testing, because they were just concerned that she still wasn't waking up for feedings, and they wanted to make sure that there wasn't something deeper going on. So when we were at the hospital, we met with a neonatologist that was there on staff that day. She sat with us and talked with us and had us go through the entire story from start to finish, and watched us do a feeding. And of course, my daughter was more awake while we were there. She took a bottle fine, but she said, she seems healthy and okay. I don't really know, but I don't want to put her through a whole bunch of tests, because there was nothing that she would want to be testing her for at that point. Everything seemed normal. So we left the hospital just kind of with the same instructions to keep on like we were, and hope that she would start to be more wakeful and alert. And that night that we got home from the hospital, my parents were bringing our two older kids home. And for the first time, our new baby, she was so awake and alert. For 5 hours, she was awake. That was had never happened. And so I don't know what made her turn a corner, but she did. And that increased each day. And at 2.5 weeks, she finally nursed at the breast again for the first time since she was 5 days old. And that gradually increased more times a day to where she had her last bottle when she was 5 weeks. So at this point, she is going to be 12 weeks old in a couple of days, and she's nursing great. And it seems like a distant memory, but it was really, really difficult, and it kind of took me by surprise. So I just wanted to share that experience, because for me, it was, like I said, I think I kind of took for granted how easy breastfeeding was. You always hear that it can be hard, but I was a little cocky having two babies that nursed great. And it was just really humbling to me, because I never expected to find myself 5 days postpartum hooked up to a pump trying to feed this baby that didn't want to be fed, who could nurse, but now she can't. And I just have a lot of respect for any other moms or parents that have gone through something like that or will go through it and have to really fight for their breastfeeding relationship or just fight for their baby and what they think is right in general. So just kind of wanted to share my experience and hope that maybe it'll provide a little bit of hope to someone else out there.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I know that especially, like you said, being a third-time mom and having had no issues before, I'm sure that was just completely hard to wrap your head around, like you mentioned.
Yeah, it was a lot. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but we're on the other side now. And it's, it seems like it was forever ago and she's doing so great now. But in the moment, it feels support is everything, I would say. So if anyone does go through something like that, just having those people around to keep you grounded, I could have probably been a lot worse had I not had all that support.
Yeah, definitely. Got to reach out and get help and just keep looking for support if you're not finding it.
Absolutely.
All right, Christina, well, I'm going to have you send your resources to me and I'll put those on your show notes page. And then did you want to share where people can connect with you?
Absolutely. So I'm on Facebook and Instagram. Facebook is just Christina Reynolds. I'm sure there's a lot out there, but that's where I'm under. And then my Instagram is Tina, Tina .Ray, REY 3. So you can find me there. Both of those are private, but please feel free to message me if you want to reach out and connect.
Okay. And then you're in our Patreon Facebook group as well and pretty active in there.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories today.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and to share.
Now I'm going to chat with Brandi from Ergobaby, today's sponsor. Hi, Brandi. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today to talk to me about Ergobaby and all things baby wearing.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So much fun.
All right. Well, can you tell my listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do at Ergobaby?
Yes. So my name is Brandi Sellers-Jackson. I'm the social media manager over at Ergobaby. So what that looks like is, myself and Christina Soletti, we create content that is about baby wearing, obviously, ergo products, but then also what that looks like within parenting. So we cover everything, obviously, from baby wearing basics to tips. Like we have a Tips Tuesday to, how can I get my little one to sleep and how can I get things done? How does that work? And how can I have some free hands? And so enter Ergobaby. So we try to combine all of those things, just to make everyone's lives a little bit easier during this #parent life.
Yeah. So I've been a fan of Ergobaby products for, I guess, coming up on a decade now. And I just love the function and they're beautiful and they work really well. But I also love the brand and how you guys really put so much effort into focusing on the benefits of baby wearing and like you said, even just expanding beyond that into supporting parents through parenthood. And I really love your most recent Why Baby Wear series, which is a hashtag for those of you that are into hashtags. Can you talk a little bit about those efforts and then just some of those favorite benefits of baby wearing that you guys are covering with that?
Yeah, there are a few things. One of my favorites is obviously you get stuff done. I mean, with a lot of us who, whether you have one baby or 20 babies, 3 can feel like 20.
Right.
Especially now during COVID, I think, all of us are so quarantined in. It can feel overwhelming. You have kids who are remote learning, but then also you have a toddler who's just really fussy and just wants to be held, or you have a little one, a newborn who needs to be held. It can be really challenging. And so one of my favorite benefits is that you're able to get some things done. You're able to multitask. You're able to be hands-free. And one of the things that I've always said, too, about baby wearing that I've always loved is that, especially when you're in the throes of postpartum, new baby, you can begin to feel like you're just this extension of another person and that you're actually not a person. Mm-hmm. You don't know when the last time you took a shower, when was the last time that you brushed your teeth, and all those things. You don't even know when was the last time you went to the bathroom.
Right.
And those things being because you are literally holding a little person all the time. And so the beauty in baby wearing is that you have your hands free, and hands, we can go and make ourselves a meal. We can go, wash a dish or two. We can brush our teeth. We can, I don't know, whatever you use for your hands. And it reminds yourself that you're a human and you're a person. And, just that connection of getting things done, being able to multitask, doing things that you did before. And so I think that's one of the many benefits of baby wearing, just being hands-free. Obviously, there's tummy time. A lot of people stress about getting tummy time in, and baby wearing actually allows you to get your tummy time in.
Right.
So you're doing all the things. You're getting stuff done. You're getting tummy time done. You're building a connection with your little one. There's so many. And then also, obviously, baby's able to see from your point of view and observe, as opposed to just, in a bassinet or in a crib or, in the playpen. You're able to put baby on you and talk with them as you're doing things, whether you're making yourself some food or whether you're, drawing or whatever it is, working. I mean, so many of us are working right now from home. You're able to talk to baby while you're doing it. And so, yeah, I guess if I could sum it up, you're able to connect with yourself by simply doing the things that you may have done before, because you have some free arms, you have some free hands,
right.
But then also there's just so many benefits to it that I just named.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of two categories. There's like the practicality of all the things you can get done, and just and the tummy time, getting that in, because babies like to be baby weared and they generally hate tummy time. So that's a nice trade-off. But there's also a lot of research too around like benefits with bonding and that type of thing as well, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, when you're baby wearing, baby is on you. So, I always say skin to skin, even if you have on a sweater, that's fine. But, baby is on you. They're connected to you. They can hear your heartbeat. You can feel them breathing. They can feel you breathing, and, there's so many benefits of it. You're literally attached. So, I mean,
attachment parenting.
There's that.
Yeah,
there's that,
Yeah.
I mean, for those of us who live here in, California or anywhere right now that's just ridiculously hot, I always tell folks, hey, listen, skin to skin with the carrier. Just y'all just walk around, just skin to skin. It's hot, it's whatever.
Yep.
So, I think it's just such a win-win.
Definitely. Yeah, I always liked, I had, my first baby was a winter baby. And so I was worried about, keeping her warm, as well as like flu season and keeping people's hands off of her. And I feel like now, flu season is kind of year round with COVID. And it's just a nice way to keep baby close and not have to worry about the outside world as much, because people feel very sometimes entitled to get in your baby's face when they're in a stroller, but they're probably not going to get in your face when baby's 2 inches from it.
Yeah, that's a huge benefit. I mean, for sure, when you have baby on you, who is that person who's just all up in your bubble space like that? Who's that person who's just like all up in there? Like, although I will say this, I did experience it one time. I was wearing my middle child at the time, and I had them in a carrier. And there's just one person. It's never happened besides this one person who literally was trying to get all up in the carrier to look at the baby. And I was just like, gosh. Really? Wow. You're being that person right now. You're that person. I've never experienced that.
And you've never forgotten it.
I've never forgotten it. I've never forgotten it ever. And their face is seared in my brain because of it. Yeah. Yeah. It was quite alarming.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you probably a hard question with how familiar you are with Ergobaby products, but do you have a favorite carrier, just personally?
Let's see. Honestly, I would say the classic.
I feel like every Ergobaby person I talk to says that. It's so funny. The OG.
Yeah, the classic. Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love facing out. It's great. It's wonderful. Depending on the baby, some babies absolutely love it. There's some babies that are like, yeah, this is just like so much.
Right.
But I love the classic. It's just, my first carrier that I had from Ergo, that I received from Ergo, was their organic cotton carrier. and it was just the normal, the basic, the first one. And it was just amazing.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And so, I mean, that's my favorite, hands down. I love the new one. Obviously, I love Harry Potter. I love the 360. I love the Omni. I love the Adapt. They just keep getting better and better.
Mm-hmm.
But of my favorite, if I had a favorite child, it would be, the classic. I like it. I dig it.
Yeah.
So,
well, I feel you on that. We still have our original organic navy blue carrier too. And I recently talked to Nellie, who helped launch the Everlove program with Ergobaby. And I was like, ooh, maybe I should be, passing this on to another family, but I don't know if I'm ready to yet. But I just love that program. Have you heard any cool stories about that yet from people that have done it?
Yeah, for sure. And I just agree with you. I agree. There's nothing like the OG, the original. There's nothing like it. There are quite a few people that are, I think sometimes people do struggle with passing it on because it's like, there's so many memories.
Right.
It's so many memories. But the beauty of it is that when you pass it along, it goes to another family, and they're able to start their own adventure, which I think is absolutely beautiful. Just to speak to our Everlove program, basically it's a recycling program, but with a carrier. So what it looks like is, you have your carrier, your OG carrier, original, the classic, and, baby is now like 25, and you're like, okay, so I can't baby wear them anymore. I don't think I can baby wear a 25-year-old anymore. And so you find out about our Everlove program, and you're like, okay, this might be up my alley. I think it's time to release it to another family. And so basically we come and we pick it up. We have, postal service that comes and picks it up. And then, we make it nice and new. So we, sanitize, we, if there's anything that's broken on it, we replace it. And then say, for example, it is just like a carrier that has run its course, because that has happened too, where it's just like, okay, girl, okay, so we can't do nothing with this. There's nothing. It has been loved very well. And then if that's the case, then obviously we won't use it. But if it's salvageable and it's reusable, we make it nice and new, and then it goes up on our site to our Everlove re-commerce program. So basically families can, buy from that collection, the refurbished collection, and it's at a lower price point, which is wonderful. And, you have an Ergobaby carrier that's been loved and pre-loved and has, a story and a history behind it, and it's affordable. So that's the long and the short of it.
Yeah, I love that. On the sentimental note too, Nellie was telling me that you can actually send like a note with your carrier to pass on to the next family, just about what it meant to you and everything, which probably isn't for everyone, but it did make me kind of like a little emotional to think about. So I love that you guys have started that. It's very cool.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. I mean, I think a lot of our carriers, as with a lot of our baby products, but I think specifically with carriers, there are a lot of memories. If you think back to any carrier that you've had, or Ergobaby carrier specifically, you can probably think of all the adventures where you've been, where you took a trip and you took the Ergobaby carrier, where you were having, a fun family gathering. We were all able to gather and you had the Ergobaby carrier. The first time you put your baby in a carrier, hard moments in the carrier,
I was just thinking about like struggling in the airport bathroom.
Yes. And all those memories come rushing back.
Yeah.
And so it's really, really, really beautiful. It really is. And just to share that love via something that you and your family were able to benefit from, I think is just such a wonderful, wonderful thing. So,
yeah. I agree. Well, thank you so much, Brandi, for chatting with me today. This was so fun.
Thank you for having me. I'm always down to talk babies and parenting and all that jazz.
Can you tell people where they can find you? Because you are always sharing amazing content on your personal account as well.
Love it. Yes, you can find me at B Stereo on Instagram, just B as in boy and then stereo. And then obviously, Ergobaby. I'm always thinking of cool things to put out there.
Very cool. And people can use the Why Babywear hashtag as well to share their stories, or do you have a better hashtag for them to use?
Why Babywear is absolutely perfect. It just encompasses everything. So, yeah.
Very cool. All right. Thanks again, Brandi.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much again to Christina for sharing her birth stories with us and to Ergobaby for sponsoring this episode. If you want more information from today's episode, including Christina's birth videos, you can head over to thebirthhour.com and search for Christina's name in the search bar. And don't forget to check out all of the fun things going on with Everlove and Ergobaby over at ergobaby.com. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.